Now I would like to introduce us to the second portion of this morning, where we're going to have a panel with and have a discussion on how we can future-proof ourselves and potentially leverage some of the upcoming opportunities as well. So I'd like to introduce our panel. First up, we have Joey. I promise that you will have a chance to meet her. So Joey Mack, who is an innovator at the Knowledge Society. Next up, we have Nahid Kurji, who is the president and CEO at Cyclica. And then we have Cynthia Vuketz, who's the Senior Advisor, Talent, Inclusion, and Engagement at BMO Financial Group. And then if Dr. Nader Hirja, who's a partner and digital lead at PwC Canada, can join us. And finally, Dr. Eugenia Duodu, who is the CEO of Visions of Science. So we can have a round of applause for all of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know leading up to this event, there's been a lot of buzz online. I think a lot of people are really excited for today, and I think a large part of that is definitely getting to hear your take on the future of work and how people can potentially prepare themselves. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be doing a discussion first, and then we're going to be moving on to answering questions from the audience. So if you haven't already, please check out Slido. I believe it's sli.do, and you're able to submit your questions that way. Our event code is 4823, and you can also join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag FutureProofing2019. I kind of want to kick off this discussion by getting to know each of you a little bit better. And maybe if you can tell me a little bit about yourself and share a story where you've had to be resilient. Yeah, Joey, if you can kick us off, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello, guys. I'm super excited to be here. So just a little bit about myself. So I'm a very eager learner, and I can sometimes be a total nerd. Recently, I'm really excited about different emerging technologies and exponential technologies, as these are going to really tap into our future. So I've been going really deep into the field of artificial intelligence and its intersection into the biotech sector. So I've developed projects to leveraging convolutional neural networks to detect skin cancer. Recently, I've been working on this project where we're leveraging a type of generative machine learning model called variational autoencoders to generate molecules for drug discovery. And drug discovery is this kind of field that I've always been really struck by, just all the inefficiencies in this field, and definitely shaped by my experience working at U of T over the summer. Research is awesome, it's really exciting, but I've also witnessed firsthand how slow it can be. So I'm really excited about this project, and essentially what we're doing is that it's a two-part project where the first part is generating molecules for drug discovery, and the second part is where we're leveraging Monte Carlo search algorithm, which is a search algorithm commonly deployed in gamings. So for instance, AlphaGo, which is Google's kind of AI for playing Go, they deploy this search algorithm to essentially figure out all the possible moves in a game. And what this does in terms of drug discovery is that it essentially searches through all of the possible synthesis reactions to generate these compounds and synthesize the generated compounds. So that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm super excited for this project, and it's going. So I'm using this project to enter a competition known as CSE Young Innovators Award, and I'm just super excited for that. And then on top of all of that, I am a high school student. So I go high school during the day, and of course here I am during the weekend. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I had to be resilient about was that just in high school, definitely, we don't necessarily praise the notion of thinking big, and we don't think that 16-year-olds can do anything, but I totally believe that, like, it doesn't matter what age you are. Age is just a number. Like, you can just go out and start doing things. Like, why wait until, like, why is there a timeline for you to be able to do stuff that's actually important? Why can't you just tap into what you're interested in now? Why wait for when you graduate from university when you can do it now? So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you. And now that you've had a chance to meet Joey, you may also understand what I'm speaking about in terms of her being in a job that doesn't even exist now. Maybe if you could share a moment with us?
Yeah, so hi everybody. My name is Nahid Khorji. I'm the president and CEO of Cyclica, and you'll hear why I understand why they put me next to Joey. Cyclica is a Toronto-based computational biophysics and AI company that is decentralizing the future of the way in which medicines are discovered. We're a team of over 30 people in Toronto, Boston, London, UK, and we've been around for about 7 years. We've raised over $14 million, and we're working with some of the biggest pharma companies in the world. But what you'll increasingly hear is that the future of the way in which medicines are discovered are not in my opinion, the hands of big pharma companies like Pfizer and GSK and Novartis, Merck, Roche, the big multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies. Instead, they will be with hyper-innovative early-stage biotech companies, because biotech companies are very fast at moving, they're super innovative, and now I understand with Joey, this is the future. And it's very exciting. So a little bit about myself. I have a bit of an eclectic background, though I'm the CEO of Cyclica, and it's very deeply scientific and technological. My background is historically in finance, and I'll spend a little bit of time on that in the next few minutes. But it's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a very productive conversation.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Cynthia Vuquetz. My current job is in human resources with the Bank of Montreal. I'm the head of equity and inclusion for BMO's Wealth Management Group. I also have a slightly different background than what I'm currently working in. I would go so far as to say my academic background has nothing to do with my current job or my current industry. So I have a bachelor in journalism. I worked in journalism as a reporter and a TV producer for about 8 years, moved into the public sector, worked in communications, began working in anti-racism, equity and inclusion, and then from there decided to try out the private sector rather. That was about a year ago that I made that change. And a moment of resilience, so I think we'll come back to a lot of these same themes, and was really interested to hear the keynote research from Yasmin and Heather, that adaptability and resilience are so linked, right? So it's in those moments where we have to be adaptable that we have to reach in and touch our resilience, right, to help us navigate those changes. So very quick, we'll try to keep this very quick story. When I started working at CTV News Channel, I was in the entry-level role. That was the first time I'd been in that sort of, it's a 24-hour news network. So I hadn't been in that kind of newsroom before. I'd been a reporter, so you go out in the morning, you get a story, you talk to people, you write your story, and you either put it in the newspaper or on TV. This is quite a different environment, and so I was in the entry-level job, what's called a chase producer. Basically, you work phones, you try to get people to talk about what the news is of the day. And a couple of months after that, the producer of the show I was working on left the organization, and our executive producer came to my desk and he said, "We're going to try you out in this job. If you fail, no problem. You still have your current job. But if you do a good job, the job's yours." And I was thrown into the control room. If most people are probably familiar from sort of TV and movies, it's that area you're staring at like 15 screens, you have a headset on. Had never been in there before and was in charge of it with almost no training. So when we start to talk about on-the-job learning and different types of learning, that's experiential learning, we could call it. So had to basically leverage the relationships that I could make for myself in that environment to learn from those people who already knew what they were doing while I was on the job. And it ended up working out great. I was very fortunate. I had some amazing supporters in that environment. My crew became absolutely my best teachers and my best advocates. And they saved me many, many times. And that's how I succeeded, right? Was by those relationships that I had formed, helped me have the resilience and gave me the learnings that I needed to be successful in that environment.
Thank you, Cynthia. And then when I think about, let's give you a round of applause. When I think about where those opportunities where I've been able to learn the most, it's definitely when I've been thrown in the deep end and I've had to swim and not drown.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nader. I lead PwC's digital transformation practice, and I sit on the global team. So I'm sure similar to a lot of you, I started out wanting to be a doctor, became a doctor, surprisingly, and then I feel like it gave me the foundations to do what I'm doing now. So I'm not sure I agree it has nothing to do with it. I think university degrees teach you how to think, and then you use it in different ways. So my resilience was, one, switching completely from science into business, but probably more importantly, about 6-7 years ago, I left a large organization to do a startup, which was amazing, and we did that for 3 years, and then the partner and I who did it totally didn't get along after 3 years, and so I left without having another job. And so I think about resilience is you have to trust yourself and you have to believe in yourself. And if you can do those two things and sort of reinvent who you are, anything's possible. So look forward to the conversation.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. So my name is Eugenia Diodu, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Visions of Science. Our organization focuses on working with youth from low-income and marginalized communities across the Greater Toronto Area and meaningfully engaging them in all things science, technology, engineering, and math. Interestingly enough, my background, I grew up in one of the low-income communities that we work in right now. And I grew up largely knowing that my opinions, my barriers, the things that I was dealing with was going to be completely ignored. And I felt that just ignorance in every single navigation of the educational system. I got top marks in school, but I was never, ever engaged in a meaningful way that would point me towards a future. So when we talk about the future of work, when we talk about the future, I approach it with a little bit of cynicism because it's the future for who? There is a lot of privilege in being able to think big. And I think that was really something that I didn't have the opportunity to do for many, many years of my life. It wasn't until high school that I got a really interesting opportunity from a student teacher who did not even teach me that said, you know what, I think that you might be good at this program at U of T, doing some research there. So I got into that program, and it turned out that I was pretty good at it, and that turned into me pursuing my undergrad in chem and bio, and then going on to pursue my PhD, doing a lot of the things that my other two panelists have talked about. So I did that for a number of years, and while I was doing my PhD and navigating that, I still was living in the community that I grew up in. So I had this awesome opportunity to see both worlds. I would fly to Singapore to do a presentation and then come back to the place that I lived and grew up in, and still was dealing with the violence and the other things that I knew was a reality for my life. And I still really, really felt that it was important that the youth that grew up in the community that I did knew that other things were possible for them. And I knew that no one was gonna come and parachute and bring that knowledge. So I really wanted to be part of kind of creating a change, and that aspect of resilience was also believing that I indeed could be a part of that. So I took a leap of faith and decided to get involved with Visions of Science near the beginning of my PhD. It turned into from a little pet project into a big passion project, and now we are a charitable organization that's operating. We have a team of about 10 full-time people, 36 part-time, 120 volunteers, and we're impacting 1,000 youth across the city on a yearly basis. So it's been awesome, and I'm really looking forward to talking about some of the work that we do and why it's important for the future of work in general.
Do you mind if I just add something?
Yeah,
real
for
quick?
sure, jump in.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you. We're really privileged, and honestly, everyone here, we're privileged. Like, if we can get here and if we live in Canada, if we have access to Wi-Fi, we're privileged, and we should do something about it. I think there's like just so many people out there. We don't lack people to do stuff. We just lack actually the willpower and like our investment into it. Just be invested. We have a voice, so just use it. That's really great. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Joey and Dr. Eugenia. And I definitely want to tease that out as well, because you had mentioned, well, there are opportunities out there. Sometimes those opportunities are only for certain demographic groups, and other folks are left out. So it's important as we're thinking about the future, we also recognize that who is it that is not going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And just as a quick note, Dr. Eugenia will have to leave us at 11:40 approximately, so she won't be able to stay for the question and answer portion, but thank you so much for being able to join us for the discussion. And I want to go back to you, Joey, actually. As we're thinking about the future of work and where we actually may want to work ourselves, I'm assuming right now you're in high school and you're maybe taking careers classes and you're thinking about the future. I'm wondering what factors are helping you decide what jobs you should be entering.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. So I think the thing with me is that it's exploring the kind of the difference between convention versus unconvention. And so I'm a part of the Knowledge Society, which is a human accelerator program for youth. And a quote by our founder that I absolutely live by is, to achieve unconventional success, you must take an unconventional path. So when you think about the conventional path, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just how can we optimize and leverage the conventional path to get us to like an unconventional level. And it's just about optimizing. So let's say that we're all familiar with our regular pathway of doing well in school, going to university, going to the most prestigious university, and so on and so on. But the thing with that is, my question is that, so 0.001% of humanity is working on actually real problems that's actually changing the world, and innovation, brain-computer interfaces that we've seen that we talked about earlier. So my thing is that there's so many people graduating from top universities like Stanford, Harvard, or even University of Waterloo. But why is it that the pool of talent actually working on innovation, at the forefront of breakthrough, still 0.001%? And that's because we're not thinking big enough. We don't lack the people to actually work on these problems. We don't lack smart people. There's so much smart people. We just lack kind of the motivation to start working on big enough problems. There's not enough people working on big enough problems. And the analogy I like to give is, imagine you're in a traffic jam, and there's just a lot of traffic, and the solution that we kind of jump right to is to build faster cars, right? That's what the entire world is doing. 99.99% of the world is doing, right? We're building faster cars, but you're in a traffic jam. You can't expect to just build a faster car and suddenly you're gonna move forward. You have to build a rocket. So that's definitely kind of my thinking, is that just taking the unconventional path. And don't get me wrong, I'm still exploring the path of university, and I'm definitely going to university. But the thing is, what do I do in university that actually makes me different from everyone else? What do I do in university so I can leverage and optimize the most out of my time there? And the most important factor for me is the environment. University is this huge gateway to so many smart people. You're surrounding yourself around a bunch of smart people. And the thing is that you just have to find people with the right mindset. Mindsets thinking 10x, actually thinking 10 times better, not just 10% better. Because this is what the future is about. It's about thinking 10x, and finding those people and grouping together and finding probably future co-founders and really working together and learning during university, learning how to learn, and just putting all of that together. That's going to give you the unconventional pathway, and it's also a lot less competitive. We think that the conventional pathway is the way to go, and unconventional pathway is like really, really competitive, but that's definitely not true. The unconventional pathway is basically the intersection of different of current fields, and you're creating a different bubble. Because innovation doesn't happen somewhere you're comfortable with. It happens in a totally different realm. And that's kind of the conventional space. It's actually not competitive. In fact, you're probably going to be the only person tapping into the intersection of those markets. And so for me right now, I'm just exploring, building that breadth of knowledge, and then hopefully in a couple of years, I can combine several different areas into one specific field. So emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, brain-computer interfaces, you have quantum computing, quantum machine learning, and so on, and tapping into a specific market, a specific field to actually create innovation. Yeah.
For sure. Joey, when I meet like brilliant young people like you, it makes me wonder a lot about our education system. I find that maybe sometimes we're not necessarily nurturing that ability to think outside the box and take that unconventional approach, as well as this thinking around like it's okay to take a risk, right? I find that we tend to be risk averse in our society, and what is it that we can do to ensure that we create the space for young people to take risks and that they will be protected even if we fail. I think so much about planning for the future is thinking that even if we fail, it's okay. There are still other realms that we can enter and other future possibilities. So Nahid, I know you had mentioned this in your introduction as well, that you've taken a different approach from when you were in school. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about that journey into turning a passion of yours into a career opportunity.
Yeah, so thanks. Great question. And the reason I was brief in my introduction was because of this question. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about myself and my career projection. So I've been passionate about three things my entire life: people, science, technology, engineering, and the STEM in general, more focused on science. And then number three is business. And when I look about my career, it was super eclectic. When I was in high school, I was not like Joey. I did not have the tools or the resources to go and explore a specific field like computational chemistry. I didn't think about it that way. What I thought about was the universe and how big it was and how I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I tested everything: physics, chemistry, biology, math, statistics, and I did essentially machine forgetting or intelligent forgetting. I realized what I really wasn't that passionate about. And when I got into the University of Ottawa and I pursued biomedical sciences and I went through biochem and OChem, like Nadir said, the traditional good Indian, I was going to go down med school path. And I wrote, I studied for my MCAT, I applied to med school, and then I pulled the plug on that because I realized that's not what I was passionate about. And then realizing through essentially trial and error, what I really enjoyed was, again, people, the science, but then business. And in undergrad, I founded my first company. It was a nonprofit company called Helping Hands, and it became one of the largest nonprofit school-run organizations across Canada to support awareness and fundraising for Autism Society Canada or for neurological diseases. So I took my passion in people and understanding how people make decisions, became very passionate about the science of the brain, and then started a nonprofit institution to actually do something about that. After school, after undergrad, which I graduated with a degree in organizational psychology, understanding how people make decisions in the workplace and optimizing those decisions, I worked for the AKDN, and specifically at Focus Humanitarian Assistance, and I applied those tools in in disaster response and humanitarian aid, and taking what I learned in undergrad and applying it to really impactful, meaningful work. And again, I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. This was all full-time volunteerism. And then I went to the University of Toronto, got my MBA at the Rotman School of Management, and I remember having a conversation back when I was 18 with my mentor, who is still my mentor to this day. And he said, if you want to become a successful business person, what do you need to learn? You need to understand how people make decisions and how to optimize those decisions, so human capital. You need to understand how to raise and manage money, so finance. And then the product side you'll figure out. And so I got my business degree in finance, worked at the Bank of Montreal. And while there, I realized that I was more aligned with my clients than I was with my colleagues. I just found finance and the business of actually giving money less value accretive than using that money to do something good. And so that's when Cyclica came about. The founder of Cyclica and I got to know each other in grad school. And he said, here's an idea that I have. Help me build this company. And so I left BMO and joined Cyclica as VP Finance in early 2014. To help build the kind of back office and the operations of a company. We were 6 people at that time in a small cubicle someplace on Adelaide Street, 426 Adelaide Street. And if anybody knows the old Sukhothai, that was our building. And we struggled for a very long time. For 2.5 years, we mismanaged our brand, conversations about brand and communication, something I'm deeply empathetic towards because we mismanaged it for a long time. We talked about the sizzle, but we didn't have the steak. We didn't have the fundamentals in place. And that's a big challenge that entrepreneurs have, is that they have to raise money and tell this visionary story, but then there's the realities and the complexities of biology and chemistry, and we mismanage that. And so fast forward to April 2016, the most resilient, most challenging thing that I've ever gone through in my life was having to take the role of CEO of Cyclica. When we had $7,328 in the bank account, we had a payroll of $25,000 in 10 days, and we had a team of very passionate, eager, dedicated scientists who were just continuing to chug along. And my wife, who's someplace here, I can't spot her, she sat down with me with my family and she said, "You got this." Went to the office on Thursday, had a board meeting on Thursday and sat with my team, and I said, I've invested everything that I have in my life behind you. It's you guys that are the ones that are building the product. Who am I? I'm a finance guy. And they said, listen, you had our back, we have yours, let's go do this. So the most resilient challenge that I've ever had to face was taking on that job. Fast forward 3.5 years, we're now ranked as one of the top 5 AI and drug discovery companies globally. I'm one of the founders of the Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare, an advocacy, education, policymaking group that is impacting the future of healthcare with AI. And it's all because of the people that I've surrounded myself with, the questions that I was able to ask without knowing or even expecting to have an answer, and just figuring it out alongside leveraging experience and education. And so my background was super eclectic, like just in a nutshell. If I look at my jobs, I was a painter. I did demolition of houses. I built houses. I was a bouncer at a nightclub. I was a personal trainer. I figured it all out. And now I think, and I'm able to create something because of the experiences that I've gained and the willingness to be patient and not having to know the solution at the get-go. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nahid, for sharing that. I love hearing the stories of founders, and I get to do that at the Brookfield Institute. And every single time I hear stories of how companies have been started, I love hearing that the struggle that it takes to get there, because it's not easy, right? And I think that comes across in the story you told us, the amount of personal and financial stakes that we have in that, and in the amount of sleepless nights it also takes to get there. For sure, and I do want to point out that as well as like entrepreneurship as also a trend that is emerging. More and more of Canadian workers are beginning to take on entrepreneurship opportunities instead of taking on what we see as traditional career paths. And when we think about this, how can we support entrepreneurs as well? For sure. And Cynthia, and you had talked about this a little bit in your introduction as well. And when I go back to it, you've made quite a few transitions in your career. You were a journalist, and then you transitioned into working in the public sector, and then pivoted to the private sector. I know there may be quite a few people in this room who are curious, who may want to do the same transition in terms of sectors or their job as well. I'm wondering if you can share your story, and if you have any advice for anyone in this room who's also interested.
Yeah, and I think to bring it back to some of the research that we were talking about earlier, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I saw this idea of the 100-year life represented visually in a really interesting way. And I can't do it justice with just one hand, so please just picture it with me. But it's this idea that you have work, you have learning, and you have your personal life. And as your life goes along, those things are going to ebb and flow in different ways in relation to each other. So when we think about that as it applies to our own career path or our own life path, it's how able are we to make those deliberate sort of ebbs and flows to get us to where we want to go, right? So to your point about pumping the brakes before med school, right? Nope, this isn't going to be it for me. I need to switch gears. Or to your point, Joy, about I am going to go to university. I'm just going to be really deliberate about what I'm looking for from university. So for me, I think, my career path has been very much about having those deliberate moments of stopping and thinking to myself, am I still happy in what I'm doing? Is this still a worthwhile use of my time? I think it's interesting, your point about being the finance guy and funding other people's businesses. I think a lot of people would find that really rewarding, but for you, that wasn't it. So for me, the first big shift for sure was I had gone very much the sort of traditional path. I was a high school student, did my extracurriculars in high school, thought about my different options for university, decided to go to journalism school, then became a journalist. But after a number of years in that industry, and particularly a number of years in television, in a 24-hour newsroom, very stressful environment, very toxic environment, very poorly paid. Right? So is the amount of emotional labor and time that I'm giving to this industry worth it for what I'm getting back? I decided it wasn't. And I took some time off, right? So that was a time in my life that the personal sort of rose up and the work fell off. So I took about a 3-month break, was very fortunate. My husband was very supportive of that, and just thought about what do I want to do. And one of the things that I didn't like about the journalism industry was it was so all-encompassing. I would go to work, I'd work an 8 to 12 to whatever hour day, depending on what was happening in the news. Often I would go to the gym and I'd run on the treadmill while watching the news. And then I'd go home and I'd make dinner and watch more news. And then I'd just get up in the morning and do that all again. So I didn't have any room in my life for other things. Whereas now, I have more of a 9 to 5, and I have tons of opportunity to be involved in the community, to do volunteer work, to pursue hobbies, that kind of thing. So I think, that initial transition from journalism, first of all, it was that deliberate moment of, is this making me happy? Is this a worthwhile use of my time? The other thing about adaptability is that I think you can practice it, and the first time you try it out is going to be the hardest. So when you do your first career pivot, it's very scary. But once you do it, you're like, oh, actually, that was no big deal, right? And those of us on this panel who've done the same things would I expect probably echo that, right? That the first time you do it, it feels a little scary, but then you realize, what are those cross-cutting skills, right? What are the core skills that I can bring? And for me, having worked in a TV control room, I didn't think that that was translatable at all. And that was one of the biggest hurdles for me to get over when I first started working in the public sector, was how am I going to explain my value to this organization? Yeah, I can stand in front of a lot of TV screens and tell multiple people what to do through an earpiece. Want to hire me? But it turns out that, decision-making, communication abilities, ability to be agile and shift very quickly during the workday, those are all things that once you stop and think about it a little bit, you can translate to a future employer. So I think that's another key piece about making those career transitions. And if you're thinking about pivoting or doing something different, to think about what are the experiences or the core skill set that you have from your current role or from your work in the community, whatever it might be, that you can translate to a new or prospective employer in a way that makes sense to them, that's relevant for them.
Mm-hmm. And as you were telling us the story, Cynthia, I was thinking about the branding and the communications workshop we're going to have later on this afternoon, right? Maybe we'll be able to pick up different tactics to be able to sell ourselves for potential employers. Now, Dr. Nutter, so some workers are really concerned about how automation or AI may impact and potentially disrupt their jobs. I'm wondering if you can draw on your experiences of job disruption and give some advice to workers.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things we've heard is this notion of entrepreneurship. So, but I think equally important is this notion of intrapreneurship. So, we've got some people who've got the luxury of having not been beaten down by having a job, and so can actually think 10x. And because they haven't been actually, living in reality of the job that you have. But most organizations actually are struggling with change. Most organizations realize that if you don't change, you're going to die. So, I worked with the guy who helped found Blockbuster, right? A quarter or two before Blockbuster folded, I'm not sure if any of you are old enough to know Blockbuster, but they were at the top of their game, right? So they actually didn't even see it coming. And there's numerous things like this. So for us, we really look at this ability to disrupt, but in a sort of way that is meaningful and actually makes sense. And the other thing that's really important is this notion of fail fast. We all know that things are going to change, you're going to try stuff, you're going to make stuff happen, and you're going to fail. The question is how quickly can you fail, and how quickly can you learn, and how quickly can you pivot. So when we look at jobs, so I love the fact that you're trying to post out to 2030. I don't know if I believe most of that stuff because I don't even know what the next 3-year jobs are going to be.
For sure.
But for us, what's really important is the notion of resilience. So this ability to take change and do different things with it. And this notion of questioning around entrepreneurship. So if I'm doing something one way, why can't I completely look at it and do it another way within what's happening? And so those are the two things. So we don't look at marks anymore. That's not. That's what we look at. We don't look at pure like engineering or science or math or business. We like the intersection of sort of, I'd call the creative side with the technology side, so making that happen. So those two are probably really important. And then the last is the ability to really work in teams and to sort of use, people talk about diversity. So we talked about, we were having a conversation, there's diversity of individuals, but there's diversity of thought. So having that sort of diversity of thought to come up with the best ideas. So I think that's sort of what we look for in that. And the last thing I'd say is, yes, we do career pivots, but I still have dreams where the PwC police are going to knock down my door and say you're faking it. Like seriously. So it is scary, but just say yes. Like if someone gives you an opportunity, say yes and figure it out later. And the research shows actually that if you're a woman or if you're a minority, you're less likely to say yes to a job that you think you can't do versus if you are from a higher end income or if you're white. So just say yes and then figure it out. That's what we all do actually.
I love that. Can we all say yes? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. And Dr. Eugenia, you and Cynthia have taken very different approaches to your career advancement as well as higher education. I'm wondering, you've pursued a PhD. I'm wondering if you can share some factors that drove you to go down that path and what your advice would be to anyone else who would also want to pursue a PhD. And sorry, Cynthia, if you can also jump in with your perspective as well.
Well, for what drove me to do my PhD, it was a really simple decision. I was already doing well in my undergrad and I was already engaged in research, and I had the opportunity to work with a professor that was an incredible mentor and who was really able to kind of open that possibility for me. One thing that I will say as a disclaimer, I knew that I did not want to go into academia when I started my PhD. But in my mind, I saw this as a leverage opportunity, and I'm gonna be very, very honest with you. I am highly aware that I am a Black woman who comes from like a low income background. So for me, I knew that I had to have a very high soapbox in order for people to just listen to what I had to say. So I had big ideas and big dreams, and I'm like, so let me just get this PhD so that no one can tell me no. And that's, I can do it, so let me try, thank you. And that's honestly like what a big motivational factor was for me. I saw that, well, I've had this awesome opportunity to be able to even understand all of these terms and get this far in chemistry and actually be able to be successful. So let me say yes. And this, I'm really, thank you for saying that, because it was a terrifying yes for me. Because from my family's expectation, they were like, well, you gotta finish school and make money so that you can support all of us. And I had to kind of say no to that and say, I'll figure out a way, but I don't actually have a solution. Just let me live for a bit, and I'm gonna come back and figure out how we're gonna elevate this entire community. And so for me, that's what my motivation was in terms of pursuing it. It wasn't, I have everything planned out. I just knew that a PhD afforded opportunities that not having one wouldn't. Now, while I was there, I learned that you actually become a very resilient problem solver, and you're almost fail-proof because, you know, being in the lab, you fail every single day, every single minute, every single moment. So many experiments fail, and then 5 work, and you write a thesis about it. So it's a lot of having to be resilient all the time and really trying to figure out, so what am I going to do next? How am I going to make this work? How am I going to sell this? So I felt like I became many, many different things and many different people over the course of that time. For anyone who's thinking of pursuing academia, I would say, and you know, I'm not too abreast on the future of work, but it is quite, academia is in a different place than the rest of the world. That might not be a good thing. I will say that I had to start a student group at my campus just to help grad students get the skills to be able to talk in an interview. So if that doesn't tell you what's going on in academia, there is this idea that everyone that's doing their PhD is going to want to do a postdoc and then be a prof. And that's simply not the reality anymore. So I think that if you are pursuing your PhD, and if you're thinking of pursuing higher education, really just allow yourself to learn. And don't look at it as what kind of job is this going to get me, because we don't even know the future of work. Look at it as a really interesting opportunity to learn in a very rigorous, high-pressure environment where you can be able to pivot in very different ways, and that's kind of how I took it. And that's why when this opportunity was afforded to me, I was able to take that chance, because I had already taken another one. So it was okay to say yes again.
Yeah. And thank you so much for bringing up that point about some of the barriers that people of color, particularly Black women, face in entering the job market and being seen as professional. I don't think any of us exist in our occupation just as an individual. I think there's a lot that comes with being a person of color, particularly a Black woman, like you had mentioned. And in our research, we find that, in other research as well, that people of color and visible minorities tend to be very highly educated. And I think that may also be a reality here in this room as well. But what is it for others who may not want to pursue that traditional academic path? I'm wondering, Cynthia, if you can share a little from your story of if you felt like there were any setbacks from not pursuing further education, or if you actually think it was an opportunity
No, I mean, I think jumping off of Eugenia's point, and thank you for speaking really authentically about your own journey in academia. You know, I'm a white woman, able-bodied, Anglophone, Canadian-born from an upper middle class family. So no, for me, not having higher education, it hasn't been a barrier because the system has been set up for me to succeed. And I think, you know, I'm a bit of a skeptic around higher education, partly for that reason. You know, statistically speaking, we acknowledged the land this morning before we started this session. 40% of Indigenous youth, so First Nations, Métis, and Inuit youth, complete high school, right? 90% across Canada. So those youth are not even completing high school, never mind accessing post-secondary. You mentioned prestigious universities, Joey, right? What does that mean? Who has access to those schools, right? In the financial sector where I'm working now, it is a struggle to get hiring managers to look at anything, particularly in the States, to look at anything beyond, you know, the Ivy League or here in Canada, the Big Six, right? Queen's, Western, what do the populations at those universities look like? versus a university maybe like Ryerson or like Trent. So I think that partly some of my skepticism comes from, we also heard the term meritocratic education system, right? Is it actually, or is that somewhat still of a myth? So I think as a hiring manager, and certainly as an equity practitioner working with other hiring managers, a big part of what I'm trying to do is to help people see beyond that degree or that qualification or that specific school that someone has attended. You know, when we think about the future of work, we're talking about many, many people who have credentials and qualifications from outside Canada. We're talking about global teams, you know, made up from employees in many different countries and areas. And we're talking about people who are perhaps joining the innovation workforce at the age of 14, 15, 16, who are, you know, full-time students and contributing to work at the same time. So things look very different, and therefore, as a human resources professional, as a hiring manager, I need to think about expanding the view of what qualified or what an appropriate level of education for a certain job looks like. And so a big part of my current role is about helping other leaders in the organization do that as well. I would just say from personal experience, you know, quick sort of story, in my second career pivot, so I went from journalism, took time off, did some self-reflection, went into communications, which was a relatively easy shift. It's very common. There are many former journalists working in the Ontario public sector, which is where I was. I became a media spokesperson, so I literally did a 180 and was on the other side of the microphone, was giving interviews to journalists, and then moved into anti-racism and equity and inclusion. And at that time, I realized, okay, government has been interesting. It has been really welcoming. I've gotten a lot of new skill sets, some good experience, but I don't think this is my forever home. And so I was looking at moving into the private sector at that time, and I thought about going back and doing a full-time MBA, just to sort of take a break, take a mindset shift. And so I spoke to a lot of mentors and coaches that I trusted, and almost to a person they said, don't do that. Like, wait, if you are interested in an MBA, go work for a company where they will pay you to do that. And instead, just do something to show that you have a growth mindset, that you're interested in continuous learning. So I went to Rotman and I did an executive certificate in strategic HR. It was a week, and it was just enough to, again, sort of shift my mindset and help me realize, yes, actually, this is the path that I want to go in. And that helped me. It was, I think, more for me than for my future prospective employers. You know, at no time at the bank has it come up that I have done this certificate. At no point did my manager ask me about it. But it was helpful for me in realizing, A, I can do this, I can make this change, and B, yes, this is an area that I want to continue to focus on. So I think that goes back to my initial theme of education is great for the right reasons, and we'd all have different reasons for the types of education we pursue. And it's really about making sure you're going in knowing what you want out of that degree, you know, post-grad, post-doc, certificate, whatever it might be.
For sure. I think you want to jump in, Nahid. Feel free to do so.
Yeah, so all very cogent remarks. I saw something on LinkedIn about 6 months ago where somebody who I respect, who influences kind of the youth community in Toronto, posted something that I very much disagree with, and it was experience is greater than education, and literally the greater than math sign. And my view is, I thought that was kind of irresponsible, because education plus experience is greater than either one alone. And education isn't just in the classroom. Education, like we heard, is a lifelong journey, and we as the benefactors of education are also responsible for seeking out that education. And so that could be in a week-long executive session at Rotman. That could be leveraging fantastic tools like Coursera. Daphne Collar, former CEO of Calico, and now one of the preeminent CEOs in computational chemistry at InCitro, she started Coursera, a multi-billion-dollar online education platform. From 5:30 to 7:30 in the morning, 3 days a week, I take courses on Coursera. edX, another fantastic tool. So actually engaging with the educational system and not expecting it to just engage with you is very, very important. And I think that's going to be the future of the way in which we educate, plus then apply to get the experience. That's what will provide demonstrable value.
Yeah, can I also add something? I definitely agree with all of you guys. And the thing with all of this is, as I mentioned earlier, intention really matters. It's really about knowing what you want to get out of university, where you want to go, right? Because essentially, if you don't know where you want to go, you don't know what your final destination is, any path can take you there. It doesn't matter what path you take, because you don't even know what you're trying to do. So really just tap into your intention, tap into your passion, which is a combination of like your mission, knowledge, and your experience, and then tapping into that and really finding that intention and just being really intentional about every single step of the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Nader, you're in a position where you're employing lots of people. I'm wondering if you find that education tends to be something that stands out for you when you're looking to hire, or if there's other skills or experiences you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, we looked out for really well-rounded individuals. I will just say, just to add, I didn't actually know what I wanted to be. So I'd love to have intention. I wish I could tell you I had a 5-year plan and I followed it. I didn't. Literally, I did my PhD because I didn't want a job. I couldn't afford to just travel because we didn't have the money. And so the PhD actually got me some money and a place to live until I figured things out. That's honestly, and then when I graduated, I sort of, PhD, I got to travel the world and do a couple of things. And so I still don't have a plan. I mean, if you'd asked me 10 years ago if I would have joined PwC, I would have said, are you kidding? I'm not going to go back to a large firm. And, things change. So my philosophy is, if you don't like something everyone dislikes their job at times. For me, I have a 3-month rule. If I really dislike it for 3 months, I start reaching out to my network. And if I still dislike it in 6 months, I sort of actively make the plan. So, because everyone has bad days. Now, when it comes to hiring, for us, because we don't know what's actually going to happen, we really look for people who are able to adapt and to have those different sets of skills. So I still believe education is important. It just doesn't have to be a traditional MBA or PhD or whatever. Like, we hire people who have, branding or marketing or comms or whatever degrees, right? It's the ability and what you did with it, what you do outside of your degree. I think that's also really important. And then your ability to really want to be better. So, I mean, for us, just, it's interesting the stats I heard on upskilling. So PwC is spending $3 billion in the next 4 years globally to upskill all 250,000 people. In Canada, we are spending $150 million dollars. And it's not just because we think, hey, we got to do the right thing. It's because we believe in this thing called citizen-led innovation. We don't actually know the problems we're going to solve, but we believe if we give people tools and they have the desire, they will actually solve problems they've never seen before. So that's the type of individuals we look for, where we're people who are going to question and desire, but are going to do it in a way that's going to make all of us better. And that's sort of how we think about it.
Thank you. And Joey, as someone who's entering the labor market, I want to ask you if you're even considering the traditional path of being in a job, or is it going to be an entrepreneurship role, or and if you can, if it is going to be in a traditional path, I'm wondering if you can tell us, are there things that you're looking for in an employer? Because I think that's also really important in when you're interviewing and looking for potential job opportunities. They're not only looking at you, you're also considering them as well.
Yeah, so for me, I think the most important thing is finding a community. The company culture is obviously really important, that has a mission and is really well invested into the journey to achieve that mission. And how we define success is we have like this sort of pathway, and we're kind of taking like a top-bottom approach where we go in and we're like, let's go to university and then let's get a good job, and that's success. But I think success, you should actually take a backwards approach and first realize what you want, really find your passion, and just kind of your mission, your vision, right? And then going from there, and then planning it out backwards, and like what steps along the way do you have to take to actually get you there. And that's kind of my definition of success, really working backwards. And when you factor that in, it's finding people. People is the most important thing, that have that mission, that want to be invested in you and want to be invested in the journey to get to that mission. And then along with that, impact is the next most important thing for me. Just, if you're not working on big enough problems, then it's not impactful. Like, it has to be impactful. And I think this is something that we all kind of agree, but we often think that just making an impact is really hard, and therefore we don't do it. But in reality, it's kind of like that perceived risk versus actual risk. So like talking about taking risks, we don't know what's out there, and therefore we think that it's uncertain. But like, uncertainty is not always aligned with risky. So things might be uncertain, but not necessarily risky. And just really taking that risk and really tapping into not where your comfort level is, but where your discomfort level is, because that's where innovation occurs. And a nice little way to like kind of tone it down and take it more onto a local perspective is to look at discomfort challenges. So how many of you guys would ask for a burger refill? No one, right? But we ask for drink refills. So why isn't it okay to ask for burger refills, right? Just these little things that don't make sense. We think it's really risky, but it's actually not. And just like taking these additional steps outside of our way to do these things, right? So I guess for future employees, what I really look into is that kind of collaboration kind of environment, right? Where everyone's really collaborative. So you have to understand that's not a zero-sum game. If you're literally tapping into a new market, it's not competitive. It's all about collaboration. It's all about sharing ideas. And you see this a lot right now with like open source stuff, like open source research, open source code, and especially in the tech industry, right? There's a lot of open source code like OpenAI. They're like doing some really cool stuff with like reinforcement learning. They had this program, this hand that can manipulate a Rubik's Cube, and it's just freaking awesome. And so they're like opening sourcing their research, and I think that's what we need in innovation, that collaboration, and being really open to feedback and criticism. We have a choice to take feedback and criticism either in a negative way and let it, in a pessimistic way, and let it drain us, or we can take it and actually do something about it and build off of that feedback and make it constructive, even though it might not be. Just make it constructive. It's how we perceive things that really matter. It's that mindset that you go out there and you perceive everything with positivity. And you're always excited, because if you're working on the next big thing, it doesn't make sense to not be excited.
For sure, and I think oftentimes there's ways that we can reevaluate and reassess how our work is also impactful. I think sometimes we may not think it is, but I think there's a way, because we're in our own little bubbles, we talk to our colleagues who know the same information as us, but I think there's definitely a lot of merit of going beyond just the people that you're used to talking to, and maybe sharing some of those insights with other audiences. For example, today, I think it's definitely one where we traditionally deal with policymakers in our research. I think it's still really important to talk to the general public and let them know about the possibilities of the future. And Regina, and before you head out, I really, really want your perspective on what you think are some of the potential challenges in your career, in your sector or your organization. And do you think there are some opportunities as well in the next 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, I think that goes with any sector. I'm at the intersection of quite a few, depending on what you define as what I do. And I think another thing that I just want to say in general is that I haven't heard in this conversation yet is that people only do one thing or have one job. I don't think that that's going to be true or that's true at all. So like I run something with my husband, so that's one thing.
Yeah.
I do my own speaking stuff, which is another thing, and then I run Visions of Science, and within Visions of Science, there are many different roles that I take as a CEO. So I also think that that concept of you are doing one job and it looks this way is different. And also, parenting is a job. I'm sorry, but I'm also looking at, I'm reading a lot about unpaid work and women and statistics, and I'm just like, there's a lot that can be said about that. And I think when we're talking about the future of work, we need to think about work that we don't usually pay people for, and when they are getting paid, what does that look like? So that's my spiel there. But with that all being said, I think some challenges within my sector are going to be I'm technically within the charitable sector, not-for-profit, and I found just very behind on digital everything. So that's a challenge in terms of most of my colleagues, all of my staff team were all under 30 or under. And I'm 31, so we're a younger team, and I've been able to bring in some people from different sectors and kind of seeing that breadth and seeing how we've been able to grow. I know that it's also because we are thinking differently and we're not afraid to do things very differently. Whereas I've seen with some of my colleagues, my charitable peers, there's kind of a very serious resistance to doing something differently. For instance, some charities are still doing mailing as their primary source of obtaining donations, just spamming people with letters. And so a lot needs to change. And I think some of the challenge is just resistance to everything. I also think another challenge is really strategic succession planning as an organization, not only in terms of what you're doing internally, but in terms of the bigger picture of your mission. Who will take on this mission after? For me, I'm actively trying to work myself out of a job. If we do this right, other youth will be inspired to do and empowered to do things in their community, and then they will want to and have the positioning to do those things. But I think sometimes, and I see this on not-for-profit boards, I see this across the way, there isn't this active belief that the generations that you're investing in actually will have the capacity to do what it is you say they will do. So if we are creating all of these spaces, if we are empowering youth this way, do we have anything for them to actually do when they're ready to? So I think the succession planning in a broader sense needs to happen, and I think that that's happening in different ways, but those are kind of my musings in terms of some challenges that might emerge, just myself as a leader. If I'm not comfortable with some of the youth that I'm working with potentially taking my job, then I have a problem. So also being comfortable with my, dispensability and kind of looking towards my future as well, not getting too comfortable either.
And thank you so much for raising that. I think we oftentimes don't get to have an intergenerational dialogue. Oftentimes it's youth talking to one another, or it's very much seen as, oh wow, you're doing a very good job, and that's it. And I think we need to have more of this cross-pollination among different diverse backgrounds. And thank you so much for joining us. I know you have to leave very shortly. If everyone can give a round of applause. Thank you. And as you're heading out, I just want to touch on a point that you had also made earlier about the charitable sector and I guess this resilience, this resistance to change. When I worked in the charitable sector, I think a constant anxiety that we had was if we took too much of a risk, would our funders slash our funding? Would they take away the opportunities for young people because they potentially thought that it may be too risky or that maybe we had failed because we were experimenting? And I want to flip this back to funders and folks who are funding this kind of work, is that failure is okay, that failure is a sign that things are going well actually, that you're experimenting and that maybe next time you'll be able to succeed, and opening our eyes to that. I kind of want to flip it back to Naheed, and I'm wondering what are some challenges that you see and some potential opportunities?
Yeah, so that's a tough question because as an entrepreneur, I literally was thinking for a point in time, week by week, then it went month by month, now recently quarter by quarter, and just now thinking about like the next 12 to 24 months. So thinking about the next 10 to 15 years, it's kind of facetiously a difficult question to ask an entrepreneur. That being said, I do think about the next 15 to 25 years because healthcare is very complex. It's not going to happen. Change is not going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. It's going to be a rolling journey. And so what does the next 15 to 25 years look like in healthcare? Somebody that I respect immensely, Zaina Kayet, a self-proclaimed futurist, talks about the future of healthcare being in the home. And she breaks up healthcare and she says, there's managing patients, and she's saying increasingly that's not going to be done in the hospital, that's going to be done in the home, especially with an aging population that is struggling to get to the hospital or get to point of care. And then all the way down to kind of the way in which diseases are diagnosed. That entire spectrum is going to be changed. It is being changed right now, some of which right at the fingertips of our phones. So what does the future look like in healthcare? I think AI will undeniably play a future in the role in which healthcare is managed, from diagnosing disease to getting the patient into the doctor's hands, whether it be virtually or physically, to designing more personalized drugs for the individual or populations, not just generally and expecting it to work for everybody, to making sure that patients get into clinical trials much more effectively for the right disease and much quicker, to getting the drugs to patients when they're on the market in a much more effective way, not having to rely on pharmacies to just hand out drugs. There's so much innovation happening in Austin, Texas, about creating a virtual pharmacy such that drugs get to patients in the home. And bringing this entire notion, I don't know what the answer is, but there's a lot of people asking the questions and then trying to figure out. In our world, we're continually focused. So that was the global statement. If I think about what I am able to impact on a day-to-day basis, it's the way in which medicines are discovered and brought to clinical trials. So if you think about drug discovery, from ideation, here's a disease, to getting a drug to the market, 12 to 15 years, $3 billion. Productivity in pharma has decreased 60 times in the last 50 years. It's simply costing way too much and taking way too long to bring too few drugs to the market every single year. And going back to my initial statement, I believe that's because the paradigm of relying on big pharma to do everything is out. Pharma is really, really good at clinical development. Phase 2 for efficacy, phase 3 for safety and efficacy with big populations, and leveraging their infrastructure to bring drugs to patients and getting them to the hands of doctors. But hyper innovation in drug discovery, they're just too big. They're not fast and nimble enough. And if you take themes away from this, that type of rapid innovation is what's necessary for really complex diseases. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes on this because I think it's really important. You know, big pharma in the past 18 months have essentially divested from neurological diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease. And you hear the heads of Pfizer come out and when asked in interviews why, and their comments are, well, the return on investment simply isn't enough. And I just shake my head. I'm like, the return on financial investment is enough. What about the return on people investment? Alzheimer's is costing, by the year 2030, $1 trillion of the US GDP will be on managing Alzheimer's patients. But the companies aren't willing to invest capital in actually solving them. Now, there's a little bit of a change in the big pharma industry. Most have divested. Biogen has reinvested. But let's look at what's happening in the biotech ecosystem. There's so many companies that are thinking differently about the biology and coming at it with really fast trial and error innovation to get to a real solution. And one thing that I'm really excited about is Cyclica started a company recently, we announced 2 weeks ago, called Entheogenics Bioscience, which is taking a really different path to neuropsychiatric diseases like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, PTSD. And we're going into a very unclassical, unconventional way, and the science is already proving out in a matter of weeks what people are saying you can't do. Asking different questions, trying a different path, getting to your point is really important. You know, we funded a company in Toronto called Rosetta Therapeutics, a U of T spin-out going after Parkinson's disease. Genome Canada, the government of Canada, funded this $2.3 billion, and in the adjudication of that company creation, the Genome Canada said, there are thousands of companies that have failed in Parkinson's. Why should we invest in you? I said, if you don't, then why are you in business? Like, if you're not willing to take really good ideas in science and try something new for patient populations, because Parkinson's is hugely impactful for Canada, then why are we doing what we're doing? And then that comes down to who's going to do it. And I believe that the future is in the hands of very innovative entrepreneurs, like we're seeing to my right, that are asking difficult questions and are thinking about solutions in a very different way than the conventional manner. And that's why Cyclica has invested a substantial amount of our time and knowledge, as well as financial resources, in providing these tools. And so annually, we do something called AI 8-Year Homework, where we invest only in high school, junior high and high school students, not college students, and we provide them with the actual realities on the ground on what's required, the intersection of science, technology, and humanities. What's required to actually drive value in this really complex industry, and engage in the audience in the conversation. So, you know, that's the global down to the very micro on what I believe the future is going to be and how the future is going to be ushered in.
And thank you so much for touching on healthcare management and how AI may cause potential changes in that industry. That was actually one of the questions a member of our audience had, so I'm really glad that we could answer that. And I want to take this opportunity, we're going to now shift towards the question portion of the day. So if you have a question you are eager to ask the audience, the panel, please use Slido to ask it. Our event code is 4823. And what I want to talk about, as well as what you had mentioned, is the future of work being entrepreneurship. I'm wondering if maybe we can touch on that concept about how we can potentially nurture those qualities that an entrepreneur may have.
Okay, so I just spoke a lot. I'll try not to speak as much this time. Let's look at entrepreneurship in Canada. So, and I'm just going to focus on Ontario and Toronto, though I'm from Calgary, so I don't necessarily have affinity to the city, so I'm not bragging about Ontario or Toronto, it's just what I know. There are about 4,500 startup companies that are actively seeking late seed and Series A capital in Ontario. We have a phenomenal beltway of innovation from Guelph, University of Waterloo, University of Toronto, the hospital network, all the way up to Kingston, University of Ottawa, going up to McGill. Phenomenal beltway of education And where there's education, there's innovation. There's a report that came out, I think yesterday or maybe on Friday, that showed that startup companies from Velocity, from the University of Waterloo and Communitech, have created 7,500 jobs, contributed $150 million to Canada's GDP, and are now doing north of $2 billion in revenue. That's progress, but that's not near where we should be, right? That's something that it's not progress. I should not say that we're expecting perfection. Progress is good, but we should be doing much, much more. And what's the rate limiting step for entrepreneurship in Canada and in Ontario, in my opinion? It's that the educational system, higher ed, the universities, have historically been really bad at commercializing their IP. They've been fantastic at invention, research and invention, but not in innovation and commercialization. In our space, Insulin, founded downtown Toronto. We don't get any money from the commercialization of insulin. Some people in the audience from U of T and from other institutions may say there's other benefits, but big pharma companies are driven value off the back of research that's happened here. Stem cell research, invented in Toronto, commercialized largely in Boston. Fantastic cancer research with TAC Max Lab at the University of Toronto. Agios Pharmaceuticals brought a product to market off that research. Canada didn't really get any money. So what has been the rate limiting step in healthcare and in biotech? It's the capital, the risk, and the uncertainty in having venture capitalists, nonprofit institutions, the government, historically support entrepreneurs innovating in this space. And as a result, so many companies, I'd say 95% of companies have historically left Canada for greener pastures in Silicon Valley and Boston. That is now changing. In the past 3 to 5 years, Mars Innovation, or Mars Discovery District, Mars Innovation, now called TIAP, Communitech, fantastic organizations from the federal and the provincial government have started to support entrepreneurs. If you go back to 2013, there were maybe 40 people in an audience talking about AI in healthcare. Now at Health Innovation Week in April, there are 400, 500, and you get all the big multinationals coming to listen to what entrepreneurs in Ontario are saying. So we've taken this turn. We now need to do something with it, and supporting companies and early entrepreneurs to actually put their brains to work and actually create something. It has to happen here, because if it doesn't, history will support itself that it will go someplace else.
Mm-hmm. Jump in?
Yeah, so I sit on the board Futurepreneur. So all we do is fund and mentor young entrepreneurs. We've done 9,000 in the last few years. So just to build on what was said, we're really great at sort of startup. There's actually really few barriers. I mean, the barriers are really your ability to take risks. There's lots of money out there. There's lots of computational or other capacity that's really cheap. So if you want to use Google's deep learning or you want to use other things, it's actually not very expensive. And so we're great at sort of setting that stuff up, but where we really lack is what we call the scale up. And so scale up can really be two things. Scale up can really be you and your team finding additional funding through angels or VCs or other things to sort of move up. Or you can actually go into an organization and be part of that and be bought up and have that entrepreneurship. So I think, you know, as we talk about the jobs of the future and we talk about all these things, I love the fact we're talking about entrepreneurship, because I think that is a differentiator and that is what's driving a lot of the innovation that's going on. But actually taking that and making it a reality, so making it either enterprise-wide or global or national, takes dedication, money, and actually a network. And you can either try to build that yourself or you can go within an organization and do it. And both are equally good. There may be some financial differences, but so that's how, when you're thinking about where to go, you talk about passion, also look for an organization that's got a passion for doing things differently and for trying to take those things and actually scale it.
Yeah.
I just want to put some numbers to that. 3% of companies from ideation to get to past Series B round of financing, kind of that's the scale-up rate, 3% success rate globally, 0.3% in Canada.
For sure, Joey, you want to jump in?
For sure. I'm just going to talk a little about how you should get started in entrepreneurship. Definitely not really far in the pathway, but I think the single most important thing is developing that mindset, the mindset of being an entrepreneur. And the single most important thing would be a figure it out degree. So we talk about like degrees a lot, how they're so prestigious and stuff like that. But a figure out degree is the most important degree you can get to be an entrepreneur. So figure it out. If you approach something like a dead end question, figure it out. And that comes, what comes with figuring it out is being driven by your own mission. We exist in a world where it's like everything's so connected, everything's interconnected. We have social media, and we have all these expectations that like we kind of live up to, and we want to live up to. And we're like, I feel like we're like driven by others' missions. And like we're driven by like the stupidest missions ever. I'm sorry, but like if you don't get like 1,000 likes on your Instagram post or something like that, or like whatever all the other teenagers are worrying about, we're suddenly like, oh my gosh, we're screwed. But we're not, right? Being driven by your own mission and not others' mission. In school is the same thing, right? You want to go to school, you want to learn, you want to kind of go on that higher education pathway because you want it, right? Because it gets you to kind of your mission. And so, yeah.
But, it's interesting as you brought that up. So just two things that really made me think differently is one is the person who won the Fortnite gaming, right? They actually made more money than the person who won Wimbledon. So you think about it, you're making, millions of dollars doing a passion. And then, I'm not sure if you ever watched YouTube, but those people, my kids do that, they actually open up gifts. They have the things, they do
Yeah,
whatever.
the 8-year-olds.
Right? If you have lots of likes, some of those people make $6 million a year. So I know it sounds crazy, but we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about all this stuff, but there's also a lot of jobs out there that no one actually thought about that are an intersection of getting people to engage, which allows you to have a platform to actually market, and you can make a lot of money. And so, just think about what people are doing now, and if you look at it differently or use the platforms that are there, you could be gambling, you could be a YouTuber, you could be a gamer, and be making way more money than any of us are making. So I think the world is totally open.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's totally open, but I also think that impact is a bit more important than the financial side of things. So what we think about is that we want more money, we want more wealth, we want more status because it increases our chances of survival, let's say. This is how our brains are linked, right? We just naturally connect those two concepts together. I'm not saying that finance isn't important. It's obviously a really important factor, and money can be a really powerful tool if we learn how to leverage it. And money can be a tool that can actually bring startups from like ideation stage, commercialization stage, right? It's a really important tool, and it can actually do big things. It can actually create impact, but it's just about how we use it, right? It all comes back to us, and I still personally think that impact is more important. And then talking about having an interconnected world, what I think is that the world is definitely interconnected. We're going to be exploring more and more different innovation within the connection of different industries and sectors and technologies. AI is like a huge trend lately, but like I don't think in the future there's going to be an AI company. Instead, every single company is going to use AI as like a tool to help them accelerate their own company growth, and it's going to be at the back end of stuff. No one's going to like go out and brand themselves as I'm an AI company anymore because everyone is doing that. And of course, if you're talking about like the policy side of things, this kind of branding can get misused. We see it in WeWork, who's branded themselves as a tech company, but in reality, they're more of a real estate company. But in the future, it's definitely going to, all of that is going to be at the back end. So yeah.
And I kind of want to highlight what you had pointed out, Joey, about this idea that certain people are driven by impact. In our research, one of the 31 trends that we had identified was actually the decline of capitalism. And I think that may be a shock. Some people may not believe it, but what this research is based on is the fact that millennials are emergingly starting to think about alternative financial systems and ways that we organize ourselves as well. And maybe that this may be a complete game changer, right? So when Joey is mentioning about impact, I want us to think about how they may, how this generation, when they are going through and are going to be in positions of power, how they may have potential repercussions as well. And something I had wanted to talk about, and I think the audience is also curious about, is how are creative jobs going to be impacted? Particularly, we think that that AI may not disrupt creative jobs. In your experience, where are you using creativity in your work, and where do you see the value of that as well? For sure, yeah.
I think this touches on what you mentioned, Nader, around people who have sort of a cross-functional skill set or a multi-dimensional skill set, right? So the same way that all companies will be using AI, all companies will still need to access the things that AI is maybe not so great at, like empathy, for example, right? People leadership. One of the sort of arguments around this university is outdated idea is like, oh, well, you can just ask Siri anything and she'll tell you. You know, Siri, I have found, hasn't been great at empathy and hasn't been great at people leadership historically, right? So those are the things that every single industry is still gonna need. And I think when we talk about creativity, it's coming back to the point around putting together teams with a diverse set of skills, backgrounds, and experiences who can sort of throw all the different ideas together and come up with the best solutions or the most innovative solutions, and that the creativity that's unlocked through those teams is a product of a leadership style that we're going to be looking to more and more in the future. So I would call it inclusive leadership from my professional background. But it's this idea of how can you most effectively manage a diverse team to come up with these great ideas. And that's one of the skill sets that we will not be able to automate, in my opinion. So one of the things that we'll be looking for certainly on the more human side of work or that sort of creative skill set.
A famous AI researcher at Stanford, Andrew Ng, says that if you can think about something in 1 second, AI can possibly replace that, right? So these are really small automated tasks that can be replicated and automated. That's the next few years. There's a lot of mainstream media that are scared or create contagion about AI because of a lack of understanding. But in history, you look at any new innovation that has changed the way in which things were previously done, typically it's always been for the better, and the economies have always prevailed. MRI machines, X-ray machines. These are things that if you went to the doctor and the doctor said, let me just touch your leg and tell you if it's broken, would you feel comfortable with that now? No, but that's the way it was done a long time ago, until better ways came out. When you think about AI in general, people are what? We're brilliant, we're empathetic, we have emotions, but we're really slow and we're highly inaccurate. Who can do 1,238 times 2,560 off the top of their head right now? High entropy on the answers that you'll get from the audience. But AI would be able to do it like that. That's an Excel spreadsheet. Statistics is a form of machine learning. Technology is fast, it's accurate, but it's really dumb and unemotional. And so when you bring brilliant and empathetic with fast and accurate, you get progress. And I think that's where the intersection of humanity and technology applied to the right, in my world, science or problem will be, and that's the future. So, Blockbuster. Netflix's market cap is bigger than any previous company that sold DVDs or anything that you'd go into, much lower cost base, huge value, and because of that, they're able to create content and put people to work. And so you look at the economic impact of AI to bringing content to us on our computers or on our phones, the economic impact plus the enjoyment impact has been demonstrably higher. And so that's the way in which we need to think about things. Of course, there's always going to be the downside risk that we need to be aware of, but much more often than not, the future is in a much more productive way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And just to like add on to that, this is just like a small thing, but like AI can create music and create fake images that like literally look the same as like real images. It can make fake videos, right? Deep fakes. But all of that is like it can have a good side and a bad side. And like just one study showed that like they didn't tell like the people who were listening to music what who created the music, and it was actually created by like an AI algorithm, and everyone kind of liked it a lot until they realized that it was created by a machine learning model. And but I definitely agree that will enhance productivity. And I think with us is that we think artificial intelligence will automate a bunch of things and take away a bunch of jobs, but it's creating a field of entirely new jobs and a wave of entirely new jobs. And what I think is that what it allows us to do is that it's our perspective that matters, right? It allows us to find more fulfillment and joyful fulfillment within our jobs. And it's gonna create this kind of lifelong learning path. And it's definitely gonna be a good thing. And it's definitely gonna allow employees to find meaning in their work and actually work on interesting problems that they wanna solve instead of like repetitive tasks. And then on top of all of that, what I think is that in the future, we're going to be, in a company perspective, there's going to be less of a hierarchy kind of system, whereas we're going to see a trend of sharing different talent within a company. So having that diverse skill, that diverse team that we talked about, and yeah, there's going to be that sharing of talent, and we're going to be a lot more focused on employee success. And this is one of the things that I personally agree. We should definitely focus on employee success instead of company success as a whole. So it's all about micromanagement instead of macro management. It's about focusing on employee success because for employees to generate value for your company, you have to first make them feel like you value them, right? And that's all about focusing on employee success and building that bottom-up approach.
I know we're running out of time, but if you have one last comment, Nader?
Yeah, I think though what you're bringing up, Joey, is the real culture clash that's happening now.
Yeah.
Because we are all sort of educated and everything else, but think about the truck driver who's going to lose their job to automated vehicles, right? They're not about lifelong learning. They're not about doing all these things they're going through. Or think about the person who's 55, 60, and has been super successful, lawyer, doctor, whatever, right? Convincing them to actually change the way they work and do things differently is not great. So we're talking a little bit of a, I wouldn't say utopian, but people who are in this field, who love this and all this stuff, but we cannot underestimate the fact that there's a group of individuals who have been successful, who are trying to understand why I need to change and are scared about changing. And there are a group of individuals, whether they're economically, socially, or educationally different than us, who aren't built to do lifelong learning, are looking for more manual labor or other things like that, who are totally freaked out about all this stuff. And so I think we need to recognize that as we think about, how we think about all this stuff.
For sure. Right now, the Brookfield Institute is doing research into job transitions as well, and what are different job pathways that a worker can take if they're in, for example, financial services, or if they're working as a truck driver. What are factors that will influence their decision to move into another career path that may be that may have more opportunities in the future? What we find oftentimes is that while it may be easy for us to say that, hey, you truck driver, you can go and work into this new field, there's also other factors that drive their decision making and their ability to successfully transition. And I think it's important for us to also investigate the nuances behind that, because at the end of the day, we're human. It's not always going to be a very clear-cut A to B, and that's the equation that we need to follow. And I think the importance of building that resiliency not only among young people, but among mature workers as well. I would like to thank the panel so much for being here today and sharing your perspectives. It was a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure the audience really enjoyed the experience.